My name is Dr. Candace Hawk. Let's see, I got it. I'm in the history department, but I'm also the director of the digital humanities minor. And today I'm going to be talking about yoga for everybody. So let's get into this. Okay, so how today's going to be set up briefly is I'm just going to do some quick introductions. I'm going to do a quick sort of overview of the history of yoga from a historian's perspective, and then I'm going to walk through some of the course assignments that I built into my history of yoga class, just so you can get a feel with the range of exercises that have been built into this course. So for me, I did my PhD at the University of Toronto from the anthropology department. And I specifically work in South Asia. So my research is focused primarily on the early medieval period in Hampi. So most people aren't going to know what Hampi is, but it becomes the site of the largest Hindu empire after the period that I'm interested in. But the time that I'm looking at, Hampi was a place of early tantric sort of ritual development. And it was a pilgrimage center that was focused on ideas of death and salvation, primarily through two deities. So we've got the river goddess Pampa giving salvation, and then we've got the fierce god Mahakala Bhairava sort of doing all of her dirty work. So it's a really interesting juxtaposition, but also this becomes the site of really creative developments of yoga. So this is when we start to get yoga developing into asana, into poses, into transitioning away from the meditation and the breath work. So we get some interesting representation in temples. And I'll show you a couple of examples here. So some of these temples that were built after the period that I research got granite pillars with images of Natha yogis performing these new creative yogi positions that come to be known as Hatha yoga. So this is the period where Hatha yoga actually starts. And this is a picture of the landscape that I work in. So this is Hampi. Yogis all over the place being encouraged to do experiment basically. And this is me with a monkey because there's a ton of monkeys at my site. So you got to make sure you get your rabies shots because everywhere. All right, snapshots into the early developments of yoga. We have this fantastic in a 100-pillar hall attached to the Tiruvagala temple complex. To anyone who's done some yoga, right? He himself kind of looks like a tree. So he looks a little bit like a tree, and he's in a pose that is similar to the tree pose. So if you do yoga, you kind of know this tree pose is kind of familiar here. And his hands are in this Anjali mudra, which we're all familiar with. Typically, we put the mudra at our center chest, like he is doing one leg up and posing, but he's going a bit extra and he's on his tippy toes here. Now, we don't actually get written information about the tree pose until the 18th century. Here we're getting it probably around 1500, 1534, which is pretty cool. Another one of these characters that we're familiar with if you do yoga is from the Virupaksha temple complex, which I do a lot of work in, and Dhanasarana, upward bow posture. Now, we don't hear about this pose. Again, it's a little bit different. This is more what we're used to, pushing our navel up. a backward bow. But the first time it's actually written about
Mhm, mhm. All right, let's get through this. So, anyways, yeah, I know how to do stuff. I know how to do pranayama, breath work. I've got a certificate to teach meditation, and I've got my own personal background with yoga, which is quite extensive. So basically, I got a SIG grant in 2021 to take the yoga teacher training that was available at Yoga Farm Ithaca, which was really good for me. They target specifically teachers. And they were doing this during the pandemic because they knew what we were dealing with. So it was focused on, teaching a wide range of bodies as teachers, which was really ideal to bring into my classroom because I do deal with a really diverse array of bodies, students, student backgrounds with yoga, with moving, that sort of thing. Now, there was a great focus on sequencing, on ethics and like working with student trauma, which was exactly what I was expecting to have to do deal with in my classroom here. So previous iterations of this course, I had brought in yoga practitioners or yoga teachers from the community, but this was really problematic. They weren't all good at dealing with a diverse array of bodies, right? And by having the tools to bring yoga in on my own terms, I didn't have to look for outside funding. I could marry it with course content in a really nice, seamless way. So I could incorporate these four major components of yoga practice: meditation, pranayama, asanas, and so on, with my history lecture, which worked out very nicely. Now, the course itself looks at yoga from about 3,000 years ago, or at least what can we say about yoga as it may have existed during the Indus Valley civilization, all the way up to modern day. So we looked at, how yoga concepts were being mobilized for social actions, for social justice, such as Martin Luther King working with Thich Nhat Hanh, or Michael Stone, the guru that I ended up working with in his advocacy for basically how do we fight against and how do we deal with this incredibly consumeristic world that we are in. Now, I had a series of semester-long activities that the students would engage with, but their primary project, it was sort of built around me assigning them a 2-week practicum. So they had to do yoga consistently for 2 weeks and journal about their experience. And then they would do some historical research based on the types of things that they were doing. So there's an interesting synthesis of their experience and then the historical development of yoga. Basically, the goal of this class was to empower our students who, on a regular, in a regular day and space, they've got their own trauma, right? But with the baggage that we've all acquired from COVID, I thought this was going to be especially important, and to teach them that yoga, right, is not what the West typically projects it as, right? It is not the domain of thin, white, well-off, flexible ladies wearing yoga pants from Lululemon, right? It is so much more than that. And we dove in sort of from the top down, which is not normal for the Western experience of yoga. So we investigated yoga as it appears off the mat. So everything we were doing was yoga off of the mat, out in the real world, right? Where all the trauma and stuff exists. And normally yoga practitioners in the West, they go into the yoga studio, they like it, and they deepen their practice from there. So instead, what we're doing is we're doing the groundwork of living according to yogic tenets, and then incorporating and basically supporting them with things like meditation and pranayama. So the point was, take yoga off the mat. How do we do that? What does it look like? And this really builds confidence and tools to effectively deal with their mental health in a realistic way. So I was going to go into some background and history of yoga here, but what I think I'll say is the fact is that yoga, from a historian's perspective, is a system of psychophysical procedures that lead to different goals depending on the group of people that you're looking at and the period that you're looking at. So not everyone was using yoga in the same way. For example, tantric practitioners were very interested in yoga to develop superpowers. And that's what they were doing. So it's really interesting to see that as part of our discussion. Yeah, so yoga can be, a practice. Yoga can be a state of mind or a state to achieve, or it can be, a state of being. So there's a lot of different ways to approach this idea here. So basically, the Sanskrit verbal root of yoga is yuj, which at one point meant to yoke. Right? And this comes from the Vedic warriors that were yoking their war horses to their chariots. So you could use this as sort of a metaphor or whatever, as to how to yoke and harness your concentration. But yuj also means concentration or to place. So to place your mind somewhere. And so this is the background that I'm going to zip past the historical developments. But basically, this class is also designed to show a South Asian perspective on how to gain intellectual insight or how to gain insight into the world. The fact that they believe that through practice, through experience, you learn valuable information, and that is accessible to everyone. It's not just intellectual information where you sit back and you learn and you grow by doing. So that's what we tried to do. So their primary course assignment was to pick a practice, so a breathing exercise, to do breathing or to do meditation, but to couple that with a yama. So to think about how to actively bring ahimsa, one of the 8 limbs of yoga, into their life, right? Nonviolence. How can I bring nonviolence into my life? Or truthfulness. What can that look like in my day-to-day life? So again, bringing yoga off the mat, being supported by meditation and breathing practices. And I can, of course, share some of my guides with you if you are interested. So experiential knowledge is so important here. This is one assignment that I want to advocate for everyone, and I'll end here. Breathing check-ins for students was really important, right? When you come to sit down before you meditate or before the start of class, check in with how many breaths you're doing in a minute. If it's 8 or under, your parasympathetic system is kicked in and you're in a really good place and you're present. This is ideal. If you're doing 10 or more breaths in a minute, your sympathetic fight or flight system is kicked in, and you might want to think about, why is that? What trauma might be triggering me? So we collected this kind of data over the course of the year to learn more about ourselves, what's triggering what what works for us, what doesn't. So again, trying to understand ourselves. We did do some asana work, very basic, just to kind of warm up the body so we could sit down effectively. And I bought a wide range of props for this. I need to buy a lot more if I want to expand how much movement we're doing in the class, because again, this is, I want yoga for everybody. And you need a lot of props for that. Anxiety, depression, I tried to target that. So stimulating the vagus nerve, how to do that, how to label thoughts, anxious thoughts, depressive thoughts in meditation, how to deal with that, diaphragm breathing, again, activating the parasympathetic system. And then I was just going to show you a quick pranayama exercise, which is called box breathing. But yeah, so this was all in here. But before I let you go, and I know I'm over time, I just wanted to bring us back to this tree gentleman. And, you know, this hand position here, the Anjali Mudra, typically at heart center, this really shows and tries to physically solidify the fact that dualisms are coming together, right? This is expressing unity. We do this when we thank our teacher oftentimes, but this is the universal sort of sign of connectivity in South Asia. So this was really important. And to tell my students a bit more about what namaste means, right? In the background behind namaste, which you always hear at the end of a yoga class, is the definition of this is that the divine in me sees the divine in you. And we talk a lot about homologies, and in particular, this Chandagoya Upanishad, which brings this together really nicely. It says that art thou, or tattvam asi, your soul, your Atman, your universal center, is identical with ultimate reality. So when I thank you, I'm saying that the inner divine in me sees and recognizes the inner divine in you. So by ending a class with this and say namaste is really powerful at that point. So I'll just leave it there. And I'm so sorry about my internet connection, everybody. But I can give you all the documents you might ever want if you want to explore different pranayama techniques, meditation techniques. If you want a copy of my slides, just let me know. Namaste.